Good evening. Thank you all for being here. This is a real special opportunity to get to talk about my grandfather, who was an amazing man, and he would have loved to see the reaction to having everyone here. First, I want to just thank the Lebanon Valley College for having this show, especially Barbara McNulty and Krista Detweiler for bringing the images here. Because my grandfather, as you may have read or heard, had shows all over the world in some of the largest museums. And it was really wonderful that we can bring his images to a smaller facility like this and share his work in his, what he called it, one mind's eye with the rest of the community that maybe doesn't get to go into New York City or Los Angeles or Paris and see these larger exhibits. So thank you all for being here. When it comes down to it, my grandfather really just loved people. He loved to take pictures of people, to find the essence of people. He was really just dedicated about finding what was special about the person and bringing it out in all of their photos. That's why he came up with, that's why it was termed what he did, environmental portraiture. He found a lot of the stories, whether good or bad, and brought them out in his pictures. One that is not here that is one of his favorites, or was one of his favorites, was Otto Frank. And the picture was taken when Otto Frank went up. This was the first day that the Anne Frank house had been open to the public. And before everyone was allowed in, my grandfather and Otto Frank walked up to the attic where Anne Frank and her family had lived for years in hiding. And he leaned against a post and looked out at the window and heard the bells ring. And he said that reminded him of Anne, saying that was the most beautiful thing she ever heard. And they both cried, but he got a picture right before that. And it was one of the hardest moments, but one of the most touching moments, because he really brought out the humanity of the portrait. Another one that I don't believe is here, but another of his portraits that he felt was the most important was of Alfred Krupp, who was a German business magnate who had profited greatly from slave labor during the Holocaust. And if you get a chance to see the picture, what my grandfather intended was to make him look kind of like the devil, and that's what it looked like. And actually, he was persona non grata for a little while in Germany after that, because Krupp still had a little bit of influence. But he brought out what he felt was the true nature of the person, whether, like I said, good or bad. He also, as a New Yorker, he loved to flaunt himself and talk about how great he was and how wonderful his pictures were. But he also loved to take his opportunities and his fame to showcase little-known artists who eventually, in time, became luminaries. He was commissioned by many magazines to take portraits of artists like Jackson Pollock when they were still struggling artists. And actually, in 1949, my grandfather was just about to get married and was commissioned by Life magazine to go photograph Jackson Pollock, I believe up in Connecticut. And at the end, Jackson Pollock, this is when he was a struggling artist, needed every single cent he could, and he offered my grandfather a portrait for $150. And my grandfather needed that money for the wedding for my grandmother. He decided to spend it on the wedding. Let's just say that the painting that he could have got would be quite nice nowadays. But he did have a strong connection with photographing a lot of artists and trading artwork with them. He would take portraits of people like Mondrian and trade artwork. There's a great one that he loved, was a Al Hirschfeld drawing of my grandmother and my grandfather, and that hung prominently in their front hallway in New York City. And he was also very principled. He knew what he believed in, and he stood for it. He photographed 11 presidents from Truman through Clinton, and it was an honor for the presidents to have an Arnold Newman portrait, but it was also an honor for him to take their portraits. But he always stood by his guns. When he sat down with Truman, he asked him point blank, "Why did you drop the bomb?" And Truman sat down and talked to him for about 15-20 minutes, explaining it all. And he took many portraits of politicians when they were up and coming, including Kennedy. There's a Kennedy in there. I believe that one's from 1953. And he took many over the years, including in the late 1950s. Life magazine had commissioned a portrait of 12 up-and-coming senators for their magazine. And when my grandfather took the Kennedy portrait when he was president, Kennedy had asked him what happened to the spread. And my grandfather said, "Well, unfortunately, Life magazine didn't think you were worthy of being one of the 12 up-and-coming senators." And my grandfather was a little sheepish to say this, but apparently Kennedy told everyone he could that he wasn't worthy of being one of the up-and-coming senators for Life magazine. Another thing that he believed in strongly was his faith. He was very strong supporter of certain things about Israel. My grandmother, she actually was she supported Israel's independence through Haganah, and my grandfather, through them, met future luminaries like Teddy Kollek, who was the first mayor of Jerusalem, and Moshe Dayan, and others who became friends, lifelong friends, and some of his more important photos, including one in there of Ben Gurion. I think he took about 2 or 3 of Ben Gurion, and that was taken in Independence Hall, the photo in there. And my grandfather, like I said, he liked to take what the person did and incorporate that into his photos. And he asked Ben Gurion, "Do you have a copy of the Declaration of Independence that we can use in the photo?" And Ben Gurion kind of wobbled away, and he came back, and it turns out he was carrying the original Declaration of Independence of Israel and set it down. And you kind of think about what that would be like if he took a picture of Kennedy or Clinton and they came back with the original Declaration of Independence and set it down. It's a little amazing to think the access that he got to these people. But while he traveled all over the world, he was commissioned by the Royal British Photography Society to take pictures of famous British people, and he was an American. That kind of left a little hubbub. But he traveled all over the world, took photos of amazing people, but in reality, his home was where his heart was. He lived with my grandmother in the same apartment from, I believe, 1952 to his death in 2006. They had the same studio just 2 doors down on West 67th Street, and they were there for over 50 years. And their home was a place of wonderful memories. A lot of times when my dad was growing up, there would be random people who would come over for dinners. One day it was Julia Child coming over and my grandmother teaching her how to make pot roast. Or one time Carl Sandburg came over and he was ill, and so while he was convalescing, he stayed at my grandfather's house for a whole month. And to drop by, Marilyn Monroe came by to say hi to Carl Sandburg, and there's pictures of Marilyn Monroe and Carl Sandburg having dinner at the same table that I had dinner with my grandfather. But as Barbara alluded to, family was the most important thing for him. He constantly gave us an opportunity in life to advance, and he just loved us more than anything. We lived in Oregon, that's where I grew up, and he lived in New York, but he made an effort to see us as grandchildren at least 4 or 5 times a year. He made an effort to always be in contact with us and always send us his love. He always made sure to express us as in the books, and also to make us as frequent subjects of his photography. Every meal with him was a trial in perseverance to get through an Arnold Newman photo session before you ate. But he actually is a great inspiration for my family, because when my mother was in her mid-30s, as she likes to call it, her spinster age, and she was traveling around single with with her parents in Switzerland, and she went to a gallery and saw an Arnold Newman photo display of, I think it was Igor Stravinsky's, the one that she really fell in love with. And she told my grandma, and she told my mom's mom that she would love to meet the man one day. And coincidentally, she met my father and married him, and Arnold Newman was her father-in-law. But that shows how his photographs brought together my family. And obviously here today, his photographs have brought all of you here together. And I want to thank you all for being here, and enjoy the show. Thank you.